Welcome to the All In Podcast, the show that explores how the top real estate entrepreneurs have gone all in on their businesses. I'm your host, David Morse, with my co-host, Joe Quattrucci, and I invite you to come along with us as we explore the stories of the most elite professionals in the game today to learn how they went all in and how you and I can do the same. So I just have to ask, are you all in? Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the All In Podcast. I'm your host, David Morse, with
Joe Quattrucci.
with our co-host, Joe Quattrucci, and we are psyched out of our minds. I'm psyched out of my mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely, to have Ryan Murdock. What's your title, Ryan, at Open Door Capital?
It is currently the VP of Acquisitions, but that has changed, I think, once per week over the past year. So right now, VP of Acquisitions may be something else by the time this podcast airs.
So classic entrepreneurial thing there. So Ryan, I was introduced to Ryan through a well-known podcast that anyone who is familiar with real estate investing would know, called BiggerPockets. Ryan, you've been a guest on that podcast. You are very involved in several things. And I think above everything else, too, we have a really cool connection because I'm from Maine, Joe's from Maine, and Ryan is from Maine as well. Ryan, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and just your background?
Sure thing. Yeah, no, it's always great talking to a couple boys from Maine, especially ones that are able to escape and move on and do some other things. Not that Maine isn't a great place, but so many people in Maine and elsewhere just tend to get hunkered down and just stay where they are. So it's interesting to talk to people who have branched out, left the state, left their home, and then now doing some awesome things, which you guys are. So thanks for having me on the show. You know, I've been following your stuff, David, for a while on social, and it's great to be here to talk to you guys.
It's our pleasure, man.
Yeah, so I'm, like I said, I'm currently the VP of Acquisitions for Open Door Capital, which is Brandon Turner's mobile home park acquisition company. So we have a couple of open funds right now, and we're aggressively pursuing the acquisition of mobile home parks. We've closed on, I think, about 15 million in parks over the past few months. Currently, as I sit here right now, we've got another 20 million either under contract or with an accepted LOI, and we're shooting for 50 million by the end of the year. So we've been pretty aggressive in our search, and then just our tactics to raise money and deploy it to take over these mobile home parks, which is really exciting for me. I mean, I come from small town Maine. I've got some multi-units that I've had back in and around Bangor, which I had owned and kind of self-managed for the better part of 10 years. And it was about 2 years ago that I had the opportunity to move out here to Maui to work with and for Brandon in a variety of roles. Initially, it just was more of like an assistant role for his stuff at BiggerPockets. So I still work part-time for BiggerPockets, but my role is getting
smaller
and more reduced there as the Open Door Capital stuff takes up my bandwidth. But just in helping him with video and content production and just, personal assistant type stuff to, okay, let's put some effort into Open Door Capital, start focusing on lead generation and underwriting and acquiring parks. And then over the past year or so, we've built out a team of, there's 5 or 6 of us now at Open Door Capital. Great team of people. And we're just, as well as we're doing right now, I feel like we're just getting started. So super exciting stuff.
That's fantastic. And I would definitely get into Open Door more and mobile home parks specifically. But step back. We want to know, how did you take us back even before real estate? Like what got you interested in real estate in the first place?
Well, I was in electronics manufacturing for the better part of 10 years before real estate was even on the radar. I traveled around. I lived in Mexico for a while. I spent a year in Singapore, a year in Hong Kong, kind of ran around Southeast Asia. And when I knew that was coming to an end, I had a little bit of money. I mean, a very small amount, but at that point it was more than I had ever had. So for the first time in my life, I'm starting to Google, hey, what do you do with money that you have? I didn't know, where to invest.
We all have that moment.
Yeah, and it was a great moment because I'd never had that problem before. It's I got a little bit of money. Maybe I should.
What do I do with $10?
Yeah, maybe I should be an adult and see if there's a place to put this. And I kept coming upon real estate, people were investing in real estate. And I dabbled around with stocks like around .com boom era and lost whatever money I put in then. So I was like, I don't want to do stocks, but real estate seems pretty cool. So I ended up moving back to Maine and just bought a duplex in Bangor and did the whole house hack thing. So I lived in one unit, rented out the other. A couple months later, I bought another duplex, kind of did the same thing, and just slowly started building out my rental portfolio, while at the same time started a property management company, still having no idea what I was really doing, just started managing property for other people, built that up to roughly 200 or so units, and then at that point, after like 4 or 5 years of doing that, just completely overwhelmed and just stressed out with the day-to-day operations of a one-man band, 200 unit property management company. That's when I reached out to Jesse and the guys at Maine Real Estate Management and said, look, I've got some pretty solid accounts, but I need some help. And what I ended up doing is going to work for them, which was great. They liked it because I brought on several years of experience now. I had some clue as to what I was doing. I came with my own book of business, so I was essentially self-funded. And then I loved it because they had all the infrastructure that I was missing. So they had administrative help, they had full-time handymen, they had an office, they had things that like would that now allow me to take off for a weekend and the world wouldn't come crashing down.
Yeah. I talk to agents a lot, and I know Joe does too, in the real estate world. I mean, in any business venture, entrepreneurs, we have this a tendency to go out and grab business and grow business, and we know how to do that. We know how to be belly to belly with people and grow. But then we hit that point. You were managing, you said 200 units by yourself.
Yeah. Now I was doing all the leasing. I mean, all the phone calls were coming through me. I had some, subcontracted handymen that I would sub out some of the repairs to, but most of the smaller stuff I was doing. And if I wasn't actually doing it, I was coordinating it and, making sure everything was okay. Doing all the accounting, all the billing, all the, the owner relation stuff, like all of it. So that was trial by fire, man. I learned a ton, but I got a lot of gray hairs because of it. So when I made the move to go work with Paul and Jesse at Maine Real Estate Management, like that just was just a load off my shoulders, and I was able to work for them for I think roughly 5 years with them. And at the same time I was doing all this, I was also a real estate agent. I got my license pretty early on, I think around 2008, and was doing initially I just got it because I wanted to just broker my own deals. I was looking at the typical crappy foreclosures that were great deals and they came on the market, and if you weren't right on them and submitted your offer within hours, a lot of times they were gone. And as you know, I'm sure as well as anybody, it's tough to motivate an agent to get off the couch and show you a $30,000 property on a Saturday afternoon because there's no money in it for them. So I figured if I get my license, I can at least do my own showings, write my own offers, and deal with that. And then that ended up just morphing into, I built out a pretty impressive client base and was brokering deals for other people. So you got to, in this business, you got to be diversified, right? You got to do a little bit of everything when you're hustling to build out a rental portfolio, and that all helps.
Do you remember, Ryan, what you paid for your first duplex? Because most of our listeners probably aren't familiar with Bangor, Maine.
Yeah, I paid, this was, I bought it October 29th of 2007, like just as the crash was happening and nobody really knew it. And I paid $131,500 and lost my shirt on that property up until about 2 years ago. So it was not a great investment. I would not have bought the property all over again, but there's a lot of things that I wouldn't have done over again. That's one of them. But I finally got to the point where rents are now up, debt's now paid down. I refinanced it, and that thing's finally a cash flowing property. But it was not for quite a few years.
Well, that just reminds me of what we always talk about, which is you're either succeeding or you're learning. And so exactly. you've went through this process of you now have something very valuable and experience to take away, that you can use in future investment ideas.
Yes, I got a boatload of those. Lots of learning.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask, how did all of your experience leading up to this point? You've obviously got a lot of different real estate things going on between property management, having your own real estate license and doing your own investing, and then working with this capital group. How did all of that experience and exposure end up leading you to BiggerPockets? How did that relationship come about?
Well, the relationship with BiggerPockets came about from Brandon's initial search. What was it, 3 years ago, when he was really looking hard for mobile home parks, and he kept mentioning on the podcast that he was looking for something, 50 lots, public sewer, public water. And I happened to find something just outside of Bangor, sending it to him thinking like, there's no way that Brandon's going to want to buy a mobile home park like in Bangor, Maine, or want anything to do with some weirdo that he doesn't know. But lo and behold, he was a weirdo enough to want to do it. So he came out, we did due diligence on the park, and ended up closing on it a couple months later. So that kind of built the relationship between Brandon and I. And then when he bought his house out here on Maui, he pretty much just texted me one day. He says, "Hey, I need some help getting settled and moving in. Can I fly you out for a week just to help out?" I said, "Sure." So I came out for a week and pretty much never left, or left just long enough to go home and like list my house for sale, sell all my stuff, grab the wife and dogs, and come back out here. Because over that initial week, we had kind of formulated a plan where I was looking for a change of scenery. I had had enough with Maine and cold winters. I was looking for something warm, and he just needed some assistant help and a few other roles filled with his personal stuff. And it was just a great match. So we had to get pretty creative to cobble together a job description for me that he could justify paying, and that I could justify still paying my bills and putting food on the table. It was certainly a step back financially at first, but I was confident, and it has now played out to be true that the potential for doing that has now catapulted me to a spot that I never would have been on my own before. So.
What I really like about that story, Ryan, is what I hear you saying is part of what Brandon did as a leader was he found somebody like you that had talent, and even though there wasn't an exact job description per se, he knew that he wanted to be in business with you because the value that you add and because the asset that you are, and so he just figured out a way to make it work. And then in addition to that, you were betting on yourself and your ability to fulfill that need of his by going back home, packing up shop, in making the move to go be with him. So I mean, I just think that's such two examples of leadership opportunities.
Two extremely good leadership principles there.
Yeah.
It's like more when you're hiring for talent. I think it's important to remember that it's not so much that you're hiring to a role. It's who do you want in your world, and then the role will show up. And I think that's exactly what happened there. That's really neat. But yeah, to your point too, Ryan, going from Bangor, Maine to Maui is a little bit of a difference in lifestyle.
It was exactly what I was looking for. So here we are.
Awesome.
I haven't looked back.
So take us then through, like, all right, so duplex, real estate license, you're connected to BiggerPockets and end up finding that mobile home park. Like, what else are you doing in the interim time before getting to Maui?
Well, before getting to Maui, I had been pretty much set. Like I was working for Maine Real Estate Management with Paul and Jesse, and I during that time I was still building out my own rental portfolio. So I was adding properties as fast as I could, and got to the point finally where I had enough that could sustain me. So I was able to leave the management company and then just self-manage my own portfolio. It was about 50 units at the time, which was okay. I made a modest living. It wasn't great, but it supported me and allowed me to do a bunch of other things. And then I got to the point where even then the time spent self-managing wasn't worth the money that I was saving. So I was able to hire Maine Real Estate Management at that point to manage all of my properties. So kind of went from like managing other people's properties to now just self-managing my own portfolio, because that was like the next level of financial freedom, whatever you want to call it, to then being able to hire out that management. So I was totally hands-off to let somebody else do, which then freed me up to, I was doing some consulting and traveling around, mostly doing mobile home park consulting in other parts of the country. And then that obviously allowed me to just pack up and move out here to Maui without having to worry about my rental portfolio back home, because it was already in good hands.
I think the listeners need to rewind the last 45 seconds right there, because you just pretty much took us through what it reminded me of was Robert Kiyosaki's Cashflow Quadrant. Like, you went from employee to self-employed to business owner to investor now, and with Open Door Capital. And if you're not familiar with the Cashflow Quadrant, really what Robert Kiyosaki talks about is this concept of trading time for money versus money for money. And we typically, most people start as an employee, right? You're trading your time for a set amount of money. Then we typically move into self-employed, where a lot of people think that self-employed means you're a business owner, and yet there's a distinction there. You're still trading your own time for money. And one of the things that I do in my world is teach people from day one, we want to get you in your real estate business, whether you're an investor, you're in brokerage, whatever, to be thinking like a business owner from day one, because really when you get to that side of the quadrant is where you start trading money for money, right? Money to hire people, that's leverage, and then ultimately money for additional money in the investor. And what you just said there, Ryan, just really reminded me of that kind of journey and progression through his cash flow quadrant. Cool. So bring us to mobile homes. Like why? I've been very interested in mobile homes primarily because of what you guys are doing, what you're doing. And before, it's funny because I grew up in a mobile home park for the first 6 years of my life. And then we moved our trailer onto a little piece of land for the next couple years of my life. And I would have never thought that in my life I'd ever be interested in owning mobile home parks. So why go all in on mobile home parks?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of similar in that way. I didn't grow up in one, but I certainly had friends that did. And I mean, you always thought as a kid or growing up at trailer parks, it's kind of like the laughing stock and nobody really took them seriously. But now looking at mobile home communities through the eyes of an investor, they make fantastic sense. I mean, just the potential for financial returns, the whole business model, the kind of recession resistant label that we put on them, as far as they're typical workforce housing. So there's always a demand for that sort of housing, regardless of the economy. Economy's good, economy's bad. Sometimes even in a bad economy, the demand for lower income rentals is higher. I know, at least with apartments that I've had and some mobile homes, like 2007, 2008, when the market was crashing, my sort of C-class rental rates actually increased because the demand for those units, as people moved down into lower quality assets, the rental prices went up because the demand was up. So we love mobile home parks in a sense that they're fairly recession resistant, and we just are especially thrilled with the value add potential that they have. So we typically target parks that are 60 to 70% occupied. So unlike an apartment syndication where the syndicator is going in and gutting the units and doing some pretty capital intensive renovations, and then hoping to raise the rent, and then hoping those rents sustain during any sort of market fluctuation. The real beauty to mobile home park value add is if we do buy one of these parks that's 70% occupied, that means there's 30% of vacant lots. So for every home that we bring in, that either we have a tenant move their home into the park, or we buy a home, get it set up, and then turn around and sell that home, even if it's for break even for what we have into it, or even maybe a little bit of a loss. What we've done at that point is activated the lot rent, because that's our ultimate goal with these parks, is to just collect lot rent. We don't want to be in the home owning business. We want the tenants to own their home, which means they're responsible for all the repairs, all their maintenance. Tenants under that scenario tend to they have a higher pride of ownership generally than apartment tenants, so they typically take better care of their homes, and they typically stay for longer periods of time, so you have less turnover. So it's great for us. We're collecting lot rent. We're not experiencing the high turnover, and we're not responsible for repairs and maintenance. So just every time we activate one of those lots by filling it with a home, it increases the overall value of the park considerably. So just a different sort of strategy. And as I'm rattling all this stuff off, we certainly didn't invent any of this. I mean, there's a bunch of people in the mobile home park space, especially over the past 5 or 6 years. They've really gained a lot in popularity. So it's a pretty competitive space right now. A lot of the people that have done well in the space are doing exactly the same thing that I just described. So I don't know, it's like one of those things, especially in real estate, nobody ever invents anything. You just kind of do what somebody else did before you, and you try to learn from their mistakes and build off of that. So I'm not touting that we've created this great asset class. It's been there for years. It's just all of a sudden in the past 5 or 6 years really gained some popularity, and we agree with all the reasons that it's gained popularity, and we think we've assembled the right team and have the right resources to really make a splash in the industry.
It's a really interesting business model, Ryan, and just kind of recap what I just heard there for the listeners is that some of the value in going into the mobile home park community is that it's recession proof, because in a lot of times a recession, there is actually even sometimes a higher demand for that price point of home It's something that's never. There's always going to be a need for that because your clientele is that workforce level person, and we're always going to need that. Number two, you look for mobile home parks that are somewhere between 60 and 70% occupancy rate, and then you go in and you find tenants and you start filling those lots, and so you're increasing the overall lot rent, therefore the overall valuation of that mobile home park,
Exactly.
while not carrying the costs and the headache and everything that goes along with actually owning the real estate. You really just own the land, and then you rent the land out to the mobile home owners.
Exactly. Yes, correct. And with that said, I mean, there can be some capital-intensive projects, especially if it's more of a turnaround park. If you want to expedite the infill, you may have to lay out quite a bit of cash to bring in 10 or 15 or 30 homes, and you've got to have that cash available while you sit on those homes and wait to sell them off. If there's any infrastructure issues, if you're trying to beautify the grounds, so I don't want people to think it's just you can get into this with no money down and just hit the ground running. Sometimes you can, most times you can't. You still need to be fairly well funded and put some cash into it. But once the park is stabilized, I mean, they're very easy to maintain, very easy to manage, and generally kick off quite a bit of cash.
So going right along the lines of that exact thought process, what are some of the other challenges that you've seen in owning mobile homes? What should people be aware of or thinking about before they jump all in?
Well, everybody's criteria is going to be a little different. So for us, and I think a lot of other larger operators, we focus on a few key metrics. So we're looking for parks that are at least 100 lots. Bigger is certainly better. We're targeting only public utilities. So we want public water, public sewer. And with that said, there are some great parks out there and some great buying opportunities for parks that are smaller than 100 units and parks that are on private utilities. But we don't want to deal with that. So anything smaller than 100 lots, it's not efficient for us to manage as we are at Open Door Capital from a distance. And then the private utilities, if you have private water, there's typically a lot of regulations around water testing and just providing a community water supply that we don't want to deal with. And then the potential for issues with private septic systems. I know guys that do very well with private septic systems. We just don't want to deal with them. So one of your listeners, anybody may find, especially an opportunity that's local to them that they can manage hands-on, that has the things that we're not looking for, and they may do very well with it. But we're looking for that minimum 100 plus lots, public water, public sewer. We want a stable, or better yet, increasing population of 100,000 people within 10 miles or so. We're looking for a minority of park-owned homes. So a lot of times when you buy a park, there's a fair number of park-owned homes, and they're rented out similar to what apartment units are rented. As I had explained a few minutes ago, we prefer not to have park-owned homes. The goal is to get them all to tenant-owned homes. But sometimes when we buy a park, there's a fair number of park-owned homes. So we've got to come up with a plan on how to transition those from renters to owners. And that can be either you notify everybody that, hey, in 30 days, like you got to move out, or you have to take ownership of this home, whether it's for a fee or for free. Sometimes homes are given away just to get them off the books. But more often than not, we'll let park-owned renters stay put. We don't like to displace people if we can help it. We'd rather just let them ride out their tenancy, and when they move away for whatever reason, then we'll take that home and to just opt not to re-rent it. We'll only sell it at that point. So there's a bunch of different ways to go about it depending on your strategy and depending on the business plan. But those are our sort of primary metrics.
So I have one kind of more specific question. After you acquire the mobile home park, is it typically you or somebody that you hire that's doing the management, or are you bringing in a third party to do the management of the mobile home park kind of once it's established?
Sure thing. The way it works for us is every park generally has a on-site park manager. So it's somebody that lives in the park, and they do sort of the basic day-to-day responsibilities. Their role is usually fairly limited, but they're at least eyes and ears at the park. They'll deliver notices. They may collect rent. They may meet with contractors, and they'll show vacant homes and do that sort of thing. But the overall management is handled by one of our partners, Ryan Murdock. He has, I think, about 3,000 apartment units, and as part of that empire, he created his own property management company. So they were up and running. He runs everything with Rent Manager. He's got a great team there. So he was kind of one of the many reasons he was a natural fit to be a partner at Open Door Capital was he brought this management company with him. So all of our mobile home parks now are overseen by his management company. So his company oversees the park managers, which watch.
So one of the other things that's can speak to much better than I can is another reason why someone might find a mobile home park attractive is because of the turnover. And I think you briefly mentioned it there, but can you talk about the turnover or lack thereof that generally accompanies a mobile home park as opposed to maybe a Class B, multifamily?
Sure thing. So in an apartment scenario, a tenant can rent a U-Haul, and over the course of the afternoon, they're packed up and gone, right? I mean, it's fairly easy for them to relocate. In a mobile home park, it's not quite as easy, especially if they own the mobile home. So I think there's generally a desire for them. They're not inclined to move, especially if they like their home. A lot of the tenants have put blood, sweat, and tears, and they get pride of ownership, and they've rehabbed this home, and they've got a lot of work and memories there. So the inclination is for them not to move. But even if they decide that they have to move or they want to move, it's not as easy as just hooking up the mobile home to the back of their car and dragging it somewhere else. It's costly and cumbersome to have them moved. It's doable, but it typically costs $5,000 to $6,000 depending on where they're moving it, and it's a little bit of a logistical headache. So anybody that wants to move out of the park has that sort of hurdle to do so. So that alone just tends to keep people in place for longer periods of time. And I think most mobile home owners that put a home in a park, they realize that going into it. So they're typically more selective. They don't just like kind of randomly pick a park to move their home into. They know that once they're there, it's gonna be a chore to get it out of there. So I think there's a little more thought up front on their part that they've identified the park they want to live in. They brought their home, they've set it up knowing that they're going to be there for a very long time.
Awesome. So you said it's becoming more and more competitive in the mobile home space. Like you don't just like go and like, I'm just going to owner finance this for nothing down. A lot of our listeners are running real estate teams, real estate businesses where they're primarily buying and selling residential real estate. And I love that we have you today because I find that I was just explaining to a group the other day, when you put your real estate agent hat on, you're often thinking in complete, like 180 degrees different than you do when you have your investor hat on. And my encouragement to them was to go into every appointment thinking like an investor and then pivot if necessary to the agent hat. So for those who may not have a really well-built out investment philosophy or anything like that, if someone was interested in mobile home park investing, like where does an individual start?
Yeah, it's a tough spot because there is no kind of 1, 2, 3 go-to course for mobile home park anything. There's a couple of books out there.
You guys haven't established that yet?
I think Brandon's working on it. No, there is 1 or 2 books out there. I mean, most of the knowledge out there these days for anything really is podcasts or webinars. There's a lot of those. There's some good ones. Kevin Buff and Jefferson Lilly certainly have a ton of content. I know if you go on Facebook, there's a few different groups that are really good that have live webinars. So just kind of getting engaged with the community. I know I cut my teeth just through the property management aspect, where I managed mobile home parks for years before I had any inclination to own them. And still kind of they were a bit of a laughingstock sort of thing, but I was well versed with them. I spent a lot of hours in mobile home parks getting them turned around and dealing with tenants and infrastructure issues and moving in homes and moving them out. So by the time the light finally turned on for me that, hey, these are actually a good thing to own, I already had quite a bit of experience there. So I like what you said too about sometimes brokers and investors often wear very different hats and see things in very different ways. And having been a broker for as long as I've been an investor and a property manager, I can wear all those hats and I can see the perspective from any of those different seats. So that I think works a lot in my favor, that when I'm dealing with a real estate broker, I can understand like firsthand the challenges, his concerns, like the things he wants to hear, the things he's afraid of happening or not happening. So I can kind of get out in front of those things and maybe structure an offer or structure a deal so that I know that agent's going to like it. And then meanwhile, if I've got an agent that's pitching me a deal, I'm an investor. I understand the asset class. So I know if what he's pitching me is accurate or not. And then certainly having done hands-on management for years, dealing with contractors and getting quotes and dealing with any sort of management issues, I know either I know how to do it or I know enough so that if a contractor is lying to me or doing something I'm not supposed to do, I know that too. So it's
we've experienced that.
Oh yeah.
oh yeah. I mean, if you don't know if somebody's lying to you, right? Because you have no clue. But if you've actually done it yourself to some degree, then you know. So anybody that wants to get in the space or any space, like the more well-rounded that you can be with all facets of whatever it is. In this case, it's investing, management, and real estate brokerage. Like you're just going to be at a much higher advantage to somebody that maybe is only familiar with one piece of that pie.
Yeah, that's so true and such a good point, Ryan. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like a lot of people that are listening to this may be stopping themselves and thinking, I don't have the capital personally to go and invest in such a big project, and even once I acquire it, I don't have the capital personally to do the improvements and pay for the marketing and all these different things. And you mentioned something a second ago, syndication. Tell us a little bit more about syndication and how you and your team have leveraged syndication as a way to acquire more parks.
Sure. I'll even go back to the first park that I found just outside of Bangor for Brandon. I was that guy. I found a deal, but I had no money. Like I had tons of ambition, but I didn't have enough money to take that down. But hey, Brandon did. He had the money. He was coming off a 1031. He needed to find something. The clock was ticking. But he didn't have the time or the ambition or any interest in spending any amount of time in Maine, not because he didn't like it, but because he had enough other things going on. So it was the perfect match. He had the money. He had the balance sheet. He could get the deal done. But I had the experience and the hustle to take that park and manage it and get it turned around and get it performing to the way that it should be and the way that it is today. So I mean that could apply to anybody. I mean you've got to have certain traits, or whatever traits you don't have. Exploit the ones you do and bring in partners for the ones that you don't. So in a syndication world, or actually we're raising a fund right now, so it's a little bit different than syndication. A syndication is generally raising money from investors for a one-off project, whereas a fund, we're raising investor money that goes into a fund, and we're buying multiple parks out of that same fund. So it's the same sort of principles, just it's over a broad range of deals instead of just one. But it's a perfect scenario because we have the great team, we're finding the deals, we have the management in place, we're able to get financing, we're able to put the deal together, and we're raising outside investor money from people that have money that are looking to invest it that don't have what we have, as far as maybe most of them have great W-2 jobs that they're happy doing what they're doing, so they have no desire to quit that job and go do hands-on real estate investing. They just don't have the time, they don't have the knowledge, but they have money, so they invest it with us. They trust it with us that we're going to go out and do well with it and make wise decisions and buy properties that are going to generate adequate returns for them, and that's what we do. So again, it's just a bigger version of that partnership where you have to assemble a team of people that have the specific traits, and together you can certainly accomplish way more than any of us could do on our own.
And people need to understand that you have something to offer an investor, a deal, anything like that. Like if you don't have the money, you can go find the deal. If you don't have the deal, you might have the expertise and the experience. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean we're kind of talking about the deal delta that you talk about, right?
Yep.
This idea that there's different component parts that you can still bring in, and just keeping your head up for opportunity and where you can add value to people opens your life up, your business up to so much more potential. I mean, you kept your head up. You heard on a repeated basis that someone was looking for something, and so you said, I'm going to go out and I'm going to find that.
Yeah, and anybody can do that, whether you're just trying to get help buying a duplex or you want to syndicate $50 million in real estate. The same principles apply. You got to have the right team members with the right skills and the right resources, and you can get it done.
That just reminded me. I recently heard something on Grant Cardone, and his big shtick is always like, I want you to have more debt, like acquire more debt, and I might be off on these numbers here, but he owns something like a total of like $1.4 billion in real estate with $900 million in debt. So he's got this delta of $500 million, but he's been able to acquire such a big portfolio through exactly what we're talking about. Finding people that have the money that want to invest, he goes and finds the deals, brings them together through syndication and through partnerships and through different funds, and so he's basically earning. He's almost like doing the sweat equity, right? He's earning his right in that deal, even if it's not him using his personal money. And I don't know whether or not Grant Cardone uses his personal money or not. That's not the point.
That's not the point.
That's not the point. But the point is that even if I don't have the money, I can go do the sweat equity, raise the money, find the deal, and pull it all together and earn my equity in that deal that way.
Yeah. Exactly the same thing. Yep. Exactly.
Well, and honestly, it's what you and I did on a bunch of our first deals. We knew what we were looking at. We had the experience, but we had to go find the money.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing too that people need to realize. If you're new to investing, guys, if the deal is right, the money is there.
Always.
Yep.
And I think you'd attest to that, Ryan. Like some people do, they stop at their bank account statement and that's what they see and they say, okay, I have nothing that I can offer, give to people. No, like go find a deal and Ryan or someone else will help fund that deal. I just said you'd fund the deal, so
Sure, man. Yeah, I'm good for it.
Don't let me down.
Yeah, I'm good for it.
Well, let me ask you another more specific question as far as finding the right deal, and particularly around mobile home parks. How do you approach the owner of a park if you're using your criteria and it's in the right location, it has the right occupancy, it's the right area you want to be in? How do you approach that person if they're not necessarily planning on selling yet? Like, what does that conversation look like? What does that presentation look like so that somebody listening could go find themselves some deals?
Sure, it really depends on the team. I mean, on the situation, and it especially with the kind of off-market mom and pop owners, it's really tough these days to cut through the noise because they are getting hit up from every direction. Their phone's ringing, they're getting direct mail, like everybody's out there looking for deals, and a lot of it, unfortunately, is it's contact from people that have no ability to close. Maybe they're wholesalers, and no knock on wholesalers, but there's a lot of noise when we're trying to approach a potential seller. So what we try to do is just a very direct and sincere approach where we want to present to them that we have the ability to get this deal done. We're the actual buyers. We have the balance sheet. We have the experience. We're not just locking this thing up to try to beat them up there in due diligence and retrade. Like we want to buy your park. Would you listen to an offer? So, that can be tough in a sense that sometimes we spin our wheels a lot because we've got somebody that it's different than it. Like, for example, if a seller wants to list their property with a broker and sell it, there's usually a stated price, and we know we have a motivated seller. Like they're offering their property for sale. When you're targeting somebody just on a cold call that maybe hasn't even put a lot of thought that they want to sell their park, it's kind of a different conversation. They don't know what it's worth. They don't know what they want. Sometimes they do know what they want, and it's 3 times the value that us or anybody else would pay. So sometimes there's a lot of wasted time with underwriting and due diligence, and you arrive at our price, and we find out we're 6 miles away from their price. But it's specific. Our approach is specific to the seller. So some sellers are much more sophisticated than others. They've done hundreds of transactions. They get it. They have their financials together. Then with a couple of mouse clicks, they can send them over to us and we can dive right in. But on the less sophisticated mom and pop, we're getting handwritten, ledger notes on the back of a napkin. So you're trying to pull all that together and interact with them and converse with them on a level that they can relate to. That's all we're really trying to do is relate to the seller. Whatever level or experience they have, we want to be able to relate and let that person know that we understand their concerns, and all we're trying to do is get to a deal if there is one. And if there isn't, we want to let them know that too as soon as we can, so we can stop wasting our time, stop wasting their time, and move on. And sometimes that even means that we found a deal, quote unquote, but it doesn't fit for us. So we may introduce them to another buyer that we know that's in our network that, hey, this deal isn't right for us, but I'll introduce you to Jim over here. It's a great deal for him. And whether it's for a fee, most times it's not, sometimes it is, but most times it's just goodwill. And we're trying to help the seller, and we're trying to help that buyer. So
what a great business and sales principle that you just reminded us of there of like what we're looking to do in any transaction, any deal is to relate to the seller. Whatever level, like it's your job to be somewhat of a chameleon.
Well, that's exactly what I heard too, David. You're hitting the nail on the head, and I think that was a perfect answer, Ryan. The way that you approach the seller depends entirely on who the seller is, their experience level, what their current motivation is, how they've run the business so far. I mean, those are all questions that we need to get answered in determining how we're going to approach this person.
Yeah, we had a seller a couple of weeks ago that, and when I say relate to them and get on their level, don't lie to people, don't be deceitful, but don't, if they're not a sophisticated investor, don't start slinging around jargon like everything and you just, don't do that. We had a couple sellers last month that super mom and pop, very nice, sincere, like Southern couple, like just the nicest people. And as part of the process, we learned that they love this one particular restaurant. They love shrimp burgers. So we actually, I'll give Walker Meadows credit for this. He got him a $300 gift card for shrimp burgers to their favorite restaurant as part of the deal. We didn't end up we didn't end up buying the deal, but we were happy and just wanted to thank them for their time and talking to us and working with us. And they've got shrimp burgers, and who knows, we'll circle around and circle back in a few months, and it keeps that line of communication open. So they weren't ready to sell now, but if they're ready to sell in 6 months or a year or 5 years, hopefully they remember us and our shrimp burgers and give us a call.
All right. Way off topic. Is a shrimp burger like is the patty made out of shrimp?
I have no idea.
Or does it just
I've
have
never
shrimp?
had one. I've never had one. I bought $300 worth. I still don't know what the hell they are. But somebody likes them.
I was thinking hamburger with shrimp on it, but it could be a burger in and of itself. Who knows?
Think about that.
Somebody Google that and let us know.
We might be onto something.
The shrimp burger deal.
Oh, that's crazy. So Ryan, what so you guys are acquiring parks really, really quickly. You're bringing on investors. I mean, tell me, what have you learned over the last 2 years that's really developed yourself professionally?
It's to, as quickly as you can, surround yourself with people that are better at what you're trying to do than you are. So for example, when Brandon and I started this out a year ago, it was just him and I working on everything. So we were doing all the underwriting, all the lead gen, like everything was us. And slowly but surely, we built out this team that I had mentioned of 5 or 6 key people. And every one of those people does their specific role better than I did a year ago and better than Brandon did a year ago. And everybody on the team will kind of help out everybody else if needed, but they all have their very specific roles. So Brian Murray and his property management company with his wife, Trisha, they're absolute property management rock stars. They do a great job. And Brian's done a bunch of other syndications and funds. So he's kind of our go-to for like that hands-on experience and technical wizardry. And Walker Meadows is our lead underwriter. I mean, the guy is just an absolute human calculator. He actually enjoys underwriting where I hate it. So like I can do it, but I don't do it as well as him, and not with a smile on my face. So like he is just he's an absolute rock star when it comes to that. And then we've got Mike Williams, our investor relations guy, who's super personable, loves talking to people, loves fielding questions. Again, all the stuff that I can do, I just would rather not. So he does that. So all of these people now do things that like they were brought onto the team to do specifically. And without any of those team members, we would not have been able to grow to this point.
So what you just explained there is really a daily conversation in my world with agents who are trying to build real estate teams. And so whatever business you're in, it is better and more possible. Is that right? More possible to go places faster with other people. Like success results with and through other people. And I think the quicker we learn that as business people, the better we're going to do. I was just in conversation again yesterday with someone, and he admitted it was great that his issue was just letting go and really believing that I can do everything better than someone else. And when we really dug below the surface, he was able to self-discover, like, no, he doesn't. And that's where the cause of most of his headaches are. And the second that he made that switch and now is interviewing and releasing off these pieces to other people, he's going to go that much further, faster. And it's not only for his benefit, but it's the benefit of the people he's bringing into his world. Like, that's the really beautiful part of business in my estimation, is that like we get to create bigger opportunities for other people and empower other people, and you've done that at Open Door. I think that's
and
cool.
you have to take the blinders off, which is really hard for me. I mean, remember, I did 10 or 12 years of hands-on property acquisition and management. So everything I bought, everything I owned, everything I managed was stuff that I could see and touch and have been to and worked on and like could drive by 3 times a day and look at, and then transition a couple of years later, I'm buying mobile home parks all across the country, some of which I've never even set foot in. I mean, somebody from our team has. I have done a lot of the on-site stuff, but there are properties we bought that I personally have never set foot in, that I have an ownership stake in. So being able to kind of take a step back at first was pretty strange to me. It was a foreign feeling. Like, I don't like to buy something unless I can put my hands on it. But hey, it's working because we have the right team members in place. Everything's in good hands. We have great management. If I'm not there personally, we've got somebody who's been on site that I trust that can do those things. So for me, that was, I think, something that held me back for a long time, was not being comfortable or being good at delegating and trusting in the right people. And I say right people because you don't want to trust in the wrong people. But if you surround yourself with people that you can trust that are good at what they do, you can certainly get to levels that you wouldn't otherwise.
Always surround yourself with somebody that's doing what you want to be doing, and they're doing it at a higher level. That's
absolutely.
Perfect advice.
Yep.
Ryan, moving into the final segment here of our All In podcast, we always end with 3, 2, 1 action, 3 rapid-fire questions that we ask all of our guests. So starting with question number 1. What is the one book that you've read that has made the most substantial impact on your career and on your development?
This is cliche, and I've been beating this drum for years now, but 4-Hour Workweek, hands down. And that's a good follow-up to what we just talked about, was being able to delegate and be hands-off. And you don't need to be there like staring at everything all the time. Find ways to free up your time, find ways to build systems, and try to remove yourself from your business so that you can do something else, whether it's other business-related activities or go hang out on the beach. But like reading that book and just kind of having that light click in my head that, hey man, there's a better way to be doing what I'm doing has in a large part got me to where I am today.
It's awesome. Question number 2, who's the biggest influence on your life, business-wise?
Business-wise, hands down. I mean, I got to go with BT, Mr. Beardy Brandon Turner on that one. I mean, he's just been super helpful on a professional level, and just extraordinarily generous on a personal level. Both him and his wife, Heather, have just been so gracious and kind to me and my wife. I absolutely owe them the world.
With a beard like that, it's understandable.
All right, third and final question for you. The most important question, Ryan, is all about action. What advice do you give to all of our listeners out there today? What's one actionable step they can take today to go move the needle forward in their business? And I'm curious to ask you specifically that question around mobile home parks. What is one thing they can go do if they're curious about mobile home parks?
Sure.
To keep moving forward.
Yeah, find a way to stay engaged, and that's been my advice to any investor for years is stay engaged. So if we're specifically talking about mobile home parks here, sign up for a webinar, get involved with the Facebook mobile home park groups, start listening to mobile home park podcasts. This is a tougher one, but try to go to places where mobile home park owners and operators are. So if you're fortunate enough to have a meetup in your area, that's where I found the park that I found for Brandon, was at a meetup. It was a private seller. A guy just at a meetup. There's like 7 of us, small Bangor, Maine. He just made an offhand comment that he had a park for sale. That's where I found that deal. So stay out there, get engaged. People, I think, just have a tendency to think that they can't do something or it's too hard, so therefore they do nothing. So any little thing that you can do to advance yourself, do it. And even if that's as simple as watching a webinar or listening to a podcast, if you put those steps in place, like say every day I'm going to do at least one thing, no matter how small, I'm going to do one thing to try to get myself engaged and get to where I need to be, then you'll make progress.
Perfect advice. Hey, Ryan, where can our listeners find you and your content?
Well, you can, if you want to see a little bit of real estate stuff and just a lot of my stupid antics, you can follow me on Instagram. So at Ryan.Murdock21 on Instagram. You can shoot me an email, Ryan@odcfund.com. And you can go to odcfund.com to see all about our fund and our team and all that stuff. And I'm also pretty active on Facebook, so you can hit me up in any of those places.
Awesome. Dude, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Lots of really good stuff. I'm excited for our listeners to listen and download and repeat and share this with everyone.
Absolutely. Really appreciate your insights on mobile home parks. That was just so eye-opening for me in particular.
Yeah, sure,
definitely.
Guys. No, it's been a blast. Great to finally actually be able to converse with you guys. It's been a long time.
It's awesome, and we are gonna definitely do something to get ourselves to Maui and have one of those pig roasts out on the beach.
Come on out, man. I'll set it up. Let's do it.
All right, awesome, Ryan. Thank you so much. Have an amazing day.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you guys so much for listening to another episode of the All In Podcast. As always, go play All In.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode of the All In Podcast. We want to invite you to find all of today's resources from our show page at aipodcast.co. We also ask that you take just 1 minute to leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. This is how we grow and how we're able to bring you the best content each and every week. Now go play all in.